Well, hello and thank you, Cameron. That is a true story. I was minding my own business, 4-year-old birthday party, playing 10-pin bowling with my daughter, and Cameron said, "Oh, you're Senator Conroy, aren't you?" Uh-oh. And he said, no, we're involved with the NBN. We've just become a provider. And so we had a really interesting discussion, and it is very rare to find someone who knows what a POI is, and I didn't have to explain what POI stood for. So it was a very, very enjoyable afternoon chatting away about it. So can I thank ComCentre for hosting me here today. I know that ComCentre are a big supporter of the NBN. There are about a dozen RSP trial partners who have signed up to offer retail services over the NBN, and I wish them well as the network rolls out. So let me begin by saying that the National Broadband Network will be a game changer. It will be a game changer for the telecommunications industry, for consumers, for businesses, and for regional Australia and the economy as a whole. And it will impact almost every aspect of Australian life. How we work, do business, receive healthcare, learn and interact with each other. Our communities and the world will be talking in ways they've never done. It will render distance irrelevant and open once unimaginable national and international markets. It will deliver increased data capacity for homes and businesses. And this will enable high-definition, real-time video conferencing for meetings, for product demonstrations, or after-sales support and service. It will mean business dealings, once done only in person, can be done online. And today I want to briefly bring you up to speed on where we're at with the rollout of the NBN. And then I'll touch on what the NBN means for business and the economy more broadly. But before I do, I'd like to take you back a step for a moment. I want to remind you why the government has made the NBN a core element of its reform agenda. The National Broadband Network is the largest infrastructure project ever undertaken by an Australian government. But the NBN is about more than building a world-class piece of telecommunications infrastructure. It also represents an historic piece of microeconomic reform. When we came to government, we were faced with a telecommunications sector that was fundamentally flawed. Telstra has traditionally had a privileged position in Australia's telecommunications market, owning the customer access network. That is the millions of kilometres of copper wires that snake in and out of every home and business in the country. This last mile infrastructure is generally regarded as a natural monopoly. This means that it is most efficient for only one player to own and operate the network. This model is flawed for a very simple reason. While Telstra grants wholesale access to its copper network to competitors, it also competes against those competitors at the retail level. So naturally, Telstra has an incentive to favour its own retail business over competing retail business in terms of price and non-price conditions. This obviously results in an unfair market. Telstra's competitors are simply unable to obtain equivalent access to the copper network as Telstra itself. It is never in Telstra's interests to give competitors access to its network, although it is forced to by the ACCC. Sadly, Telstra has probably spent more on legal battles with the ACCC than it has on maintenance of the CAN, and it has little investment to invest in upgrading its own network. This is because, historically, it has demanded huge regulatory concessions, and successive governments, and to their credit, the Howard government, included in this, both sides of politics, not to mention the ACCC, have deemed that those regulatory concessions were unacceptable. High barriers to entry mean the cost and risks to competitors to build their own competing infrastructure are prohibitive. This is, of course, a feature of a natural monopoly, stock standard feature. As we know, it will be inefficient to duplicate water, gas and electricity networks. so too is it inefficient to duplicate a national telco infrastructure. Some in this long debate have called for fixed line competition to be encouraged and fostered. They claim the NBN will eliminate such competition, as if there is such sort of competition today. The fact is that for more than a decade, infrastructure-based competition has been tried and it has failed. Fixed line telecommunications infrastructure in Australia remains, for all intents and purposes, a monopoly. If fixed line competition were a viable prospect, you would expect Optus to be in favour of it, just as one example. But they are not. As the second biggest player in the industry, they are the company in the best position to launch a challenge to Telstra. Well, a little bit of history. In the 1990s, Optus did build a competing fixed line network, one capable of providing pay TV and broadband services. In response, Telstra built a second fixed line network to defend its market position. In what became known as the Cable Wars, Optus and Telstra followed each other, quite literally, up each street by street. They duplicated the new HFC infrastructure and then engaged in a damaging price war. Both companies lost significant amounts of money in this exercise. The then Telstra boss, Frank Blunt, has said Telstra had no option. He wrote this in a book. Telstra had no option but to spend $4 billion to prevent the loss of $7 billion in shareholder value. A perfectly rational response from Telstra, not being critical, just a perfectly natural response. So it's worth remembering that the HFC networks form a duopoly. Both are vertically integrated. That is, the owner and the retailer are the same. And both are closed access networks, which means competitors are not able to resell services using HFC infrastructure. So furthermore, the dominant HFC network is owned by the same company that owns the monopoly copper network, surprisingly Telstra. The end result was two so-called competing HFC networks, at least one of which was a complete financial disaster, I think sold for $1 in the end, offering services from a total of 2 retailers. So the competing infrastructure model in this country has been a monumental failure. Indeed, the cable wars have been described by a former Optus executive and now Liberal MP, Paul Fletcher. In his book, he wrote about this, and I quote, "one of the most absurd episodes in the history of corporate Australia." And today, Paul O'Sullivan, Optus's CEO, who has supported the NBN on the basis that fixed-line competition has not worked in Australia. He has urged the government to ensure that history can't repeat itself. Earlier this year, he said, and I quote, "History has shown that a country the size and population density of Australia cannot sustain 2 competing networks economically." It's one of the main reasons why Optus believes a single wholesale-only national broadband network is the right thing to do. So we have a situation where the incumbent will not upgrade its own network, and the high barriers to entry mean that another player will not build a better competing network. Well, the NBN breaks this impasse. It creates, for the first time in Australia, a level playing field in the telco sector. The historic definitive agreements struck between Telstra and the NBN Co this year achieves the separation of Telstra's vertically integrated monopoly. Under the agreement, NBN Co pays Telstra for every customer that migrates from copper to the fibre network. Once the migration of customers in a particular area is complete, the copper network is quite literally shut down. At the end of this migration process, Telstra customers will be served over the NBN, a network it neither owns nor controls. And that's just such a vital transformation. This sweeping reform, I'm sure all of you know, referred to as structural separation. Now, I've described Telstra's structural separation as the holy grail of telco reform, and I believe that that description will stand the test of time. The separation of the monopoly network and the retail providers dramatically changes our telco landscape. Unlike Telstra, the NBN will not offer retail services to consumers. Instead, it will be an open access, wholesale-only network servicing retail service providers on a non-discriminatory basis. Consequently, the NBN will drive vigorous retail competition. And simple economics tells us that when there is a vigorous competition in a functioning marketplace, consumers are the winners. Such competition has never before been possible in Australia. So where are we up to with the NBN? The rollout is well and truly underway. It is, as I've said many times before, a reality, despite what you will read on the front page of many newspapers in this country. To date, the fibre network rollout has passed more than 18,000